The bridge of the Defiant hummed quietly as it moved through the darkness of space. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars slide past on the main screen. It was another routine day of mapping unexplored systems near the edge of known space. The year was 2247, and humanity had finally made its place among the stars, though most alien species still saw them as newcomers with little power or influence. Jake was reading through survey reports when Lieutenant Amy Rogers suddenly straightened at her communication station. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls and her face grew pale. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," she said. "It's a distress signal, but it's weak." "Very weak." Jake stood and walked over to her station. "Can you clean it up?" Amy worked for several minutes, filtering out static and interference. Slowly, a voice emerged from the noise. It spoke in an alien language, but the ship's computer began translating immediately. What they heard made everyone on the bridge fall silent. "This is Admiral Trell of the Velkar Defense Fleet. Our worlds are under attack. The Krath Empire has invaded our system. Our defenses are failing. Our people are dying. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need help. We are begging you. Do not let our civilization die in darkness." The message repeated, growing fainter each time. Jake could hear the desperation in the alien commander's voice, even through the translation. He looked around at his crew. They all wore the same expression of shock and concern. "How long has this signal been broadcasting?" Jake asked. "At least 3 days, sir," Amy replied. "And according to the computer, it was sent on all major galactic frequencies. Every major power in the galaxy should have received it." Dan Carter, the chief engineer, pulled up star charts on his console. "The Velkar system is about 2 days away at maximum speed. It's in neutral space, not claimed by any of the major powers." Jake walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily. He knew what this meant. Every major civilization in the galaxy had heard this call for help and had chosen to ignore it. The Zinthari Confederation with its massive fleet, the Horath Dominion with its advanced weapons, the Pell Collective with its vast resources. All of them had turned their backs on a dying species. "Sir, what are we going to do?" asked Paul Jensen, his first officer. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Earth's position in the galactic community. Humanity was still small, still weak compared to the ancient empires. They had only a handful of military ships, and the Defiant was just an exploration vessel with light weapons. Going to help the Velkar could mean violating dozens of treaties and making powerful enemies. But he also thought about Earth's history, about all the times humans had faced impossible odds, about the values his parents had taught him, about why he had joined the fleet in the first place. "Plot a course to the Velkar system," he said finally. "Maximum speed." The bridge erupted in activity, but Dan Carter spoke up. "Captain, with all respect, we're not authorized for military intervention. We're an exploration ship. If we go into an active war zone without orders from Earth Command, you could face a court-martial." "I know," Jake said calmly. "But I also know that if we don't go, no one will. Set the course, Dan." Dan hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, sir." As the Defiant changed direction and accelerated, Jake opened a secure channel to Earth Command. It would take hours for the message to reach Earth and hours more for a response to come back. By then, they would already be in Velkar space. He recorded a simple message explaining what they had heard and what he was doing. He didn't try to justify it or make excuses. He simply stated the facts and added one line at the end. "Someone has to answer." The next 2 days were tense. The crew prepared for combat as best they could. Lisa Bennett, their tactical officer, ran combat drills. The medical bay prepared for casualties. Everyone knew they might be flying into a battle they couldn't win. Amy continued monitoring communications. She picked up fragments of news from across the galaxy. The Velkar distress signal had indeed reached everyone, but the official responses were all the same. The Zinthari claimed they couldn't interfere in sovereign conflicts. The Horath said it wasn't their sector. Smaller powers were too afraid of the Krath to act. On the second day, Amy managed to intercept Krath military communications. What she heard chilled everyone who listened. The Krath were broadcasting their conquest as entertainment. They showed footage of Velkar cities burning, of civilians being rounded up for slavery, of orbital stations being destroyed. They wanted the galaxy to see what happened to those who were weak. "They're monsters," Amy whispered. "They're bullies," Jake corrected. "And bullies only understand one thing." As they approached the Velkar system, Sensors began picking up the scale of the destruction. Debris fields filled the space where defensive platforms had once orbited. Energy signatures showed ongoing battles on multiple worlds. The Velkar were losing badly. "Captain, I'm reading 12 Krath warships in the system," Lisa reported. "Heavy cruisers, all of them. And only 3 Velkar ships still operational, trying to defend their homeworld." 12 against 1, Dan muttered. "We're insane." "Probably," Jake agreed. "But we're here now. Open a channel to the Velkar flagship." The screen flickered and an alien face appeared. Admiral Trell looked exhausted, his scaled face marked with burns and his uniform torn. Behind him, the bridge of his ship was in chaos with crew members rushing to repair damaged systems. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Defiant," Jake said. "We received your distress call, Admiral. We're here to help." Trell stared at him in disbelief. "Human? Your species is barely known to us. Why would you risk yourselves for strangers?" "Because you asked for help," Jake said simply. "And because no one else would come. Now, Admiral, we don't have time for long discussions. We have a battle to win. Are you with us?" For the first time in days, something like hope appeared on Trell's face. "We are with you, Captain Morrison. Until the end." "Good," Jake said. He turned to his crew. "All hands battle stations. Let's show them what humans do when someone needs help." The Defiant dove into the battle, alone but determined, ready to face impossible odds for people they had never met. The Defiant emerged from faster-than-light travel into absolute chaos. Explosions lit up the darkness as Krath warships fired massive weapons at the remaining Velkar defenders. Pieces of destroyed stations drifted through space like metallic snow. On the main screen, Jake could see the Velkar homeworld, its surface scarred by bombardment from orbit. "Sensors are picking up civilian evacuation ships trying to escape," Amy reported, her voice tight. "The Krath are hunting them down." Jake's jaw clenched. He watched as a Krath cruiser fired on an unarmed transport, destroying it in seconds. Hundreds, maybe thousands of lives ended in that moment. "Lisa, target that cruiser," he ordered. "Give them everything we have." "Sir, the Krath haven't even noticed us yet," Lisa said. "If we fire, we lose the element of surprise." "They're killing civilians," Jake said coldly. "Fire!" The Defiant's weapons blazed to life. Twin particle beams lanced across space and struck the Krath cruiser's rear section. The ship's shields flickered and failed. Explosions rippled along its hull as secondary systems overloaded. The massive vessel began to list, venting atmosphere and debris. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then every Krath ship in the system turned toward the Defiant. "Now they've noticed us," Dan said dryly from engineering. "Shield power at maximum, but Captain, we can't take sustained fire from 12 cruisers." "We won't have to," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Lisa, use the debris field for cover. Keep us moving. Don't let them get a target lock." The Defiant dove into the wreckage of destroyed stations, weaving between chunks of metal and frozen atmosphere. Krath weapons fire followed them, missing by meters as Lisa piloted with desperate skill. The ship shook with near misses and warning lights flashed across every console. 3 Krath ships breaking formation," Lisa called out. "They're trying to box us in." Jake studied the tactical display. The Krath were used to fighting enemies who stood still and traded fire. They weren't prepared for a ship that moved like the Defiant, using every piece of cover and fighting dirty. "Paul, coordinate with Admiral Trell," Jake ordered. "Have the Velkar ships focus their fire on the Krath command ship. We'll keep the others busy." On the screen, Jake could see Trell nodding from his damaged bridge. The 3 remaining Velkar ships, battered but not broken, began moving into position. They had been fighting defensively for days, but now they had help, and that changed everything. The battle became a deadly dance. The Defiant would emerge from cover, strike at a Krath ship's weak points that Lisa had identified, then disappear back into the debris before return fire could hit them. Every attack was precise, aimed at power cores, weapon systems, or engine clusters. Humans had studied every alien ship design they could find, and Lisa knew exactly where to hurt them. A Krath cruiser exploded as its reactor went critical, taken down by a lucky shot from the Defiant. The Velkar ships pressed their attack on the command vessel, their combined fire finally overwhelming its shields. But the cost was high. One Velkar ship took a direct hit and broke apart, its crew lost in an instant. "Captain, we're taking damage," Dan reported. "Shields down to 40%. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5. If we keep this up, we won't last another hour." Jake knew Dan was right. They had surprised the Krath and hurt them badly, but now the enemy was adapting. More ships were coordinating their fire patterns. The Defiant was fast, but not fast enough to dodge everything. Amy, broadcast a message on all Earth frequencies, Jake said. Let any human ship within range know what we're doing here. Tell them we could use some help. Sir, the nearest Earth vessel is days away, Amy said. I know, but do it anyway. Amy sent the message, though her expression showed she thought it was hopeless. Jake understood. They were alone out here, and they all knew it. But he refused to give up. Not while the Velkar still fought, not while civilians still needed protection. Then Amy gasped. Captain, I'm reading new contacts entering the system. 3 ships, human signatures. The screen lit up with 3 vessels emerging from faster-than-light travel. Jake recognized them immediately. The Vanguard, commanded by Captain Nicole Hayes, the Sentinel under Captain Ryan Foster, and the Guardian, led by Captain Chris Powell. All 3 were exploration ships like the Defiant, and all 3 had heard the original Velkar distress signal. Nicole's face appeared on the communication screen, grinning despite the dangerous situation. You didn't think we'd let you have all the fun, did you, Jake? We were already on our way when we got your message. Relief flooded through Jake, though he kept his voice steady. Glad to have you, Nicole. Think 4 ships can take down 9 Krath cruisers? Let's find out, she said. The 4 human vessels moved into formation, and suddenly the Krath were facing an enemy they couldn't predict. The ships covered each other, used tactics the Krath had never seen, and fought with a ferocity born from knowing they were protecting the innocent. Ryan's ship, the Sentinel, dove straight at the Krath command vessel, weapons blazing. It was a reckless move that no sane commander would make, but it worked. The Krath ships scattered to avoid collision, breaking their formation. Chris used that moment to destroy another cruiser with a perfectly aimed shot at its main reactor. The Velkar ships rallied, inspired by the humans who had come to their aid. Admiral Trell's voice came over the communication channel, speaking in heavily accented but understandable English. All Velkar ships, attack pattern Delta. Show these invaders that we will not die quietly. The battle raged for another hour. Ships on both sides took damage. The Guardian lost its main engines and had to rely on maneuvering thrusters. One of the Velkar ships was crippled but continued firing with whatever weapons still worked. The space around them filled with debris and the flash of weapons fire, but slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The Krath had never faced enemies like this. Their numerical advantage meant nothing against foes who refused to fight fair, who used every trick and tactic imaginable, who simply would not give up. When the 6th Krath cruiser exploded, the remaining 3 made a decision. Their commander broadcast a retreat order, and the surviving ships engaged their faster-than-light drives fleeing the system. Silence fell across the battle space. Then from every Velkar ship and station from the planet below, a sound began. It took Jake a moment to recognize it. The Velkar were cheering. Admiral Trell appeared on screen again, and Jake was shocked to see tears streaming down the alien commander's face. Captain Morrison, Captain Hayes, all of you, you came. When the entire galaxy abandoned us, you came. Someone had to, Jake said quietly. How bad is the damage to your world? Trell's expression grew heavy. Bad. Cities destroyed, millions dead, our infrastructure in ruins. But we still live. Because of you, our species will survive. Jake looked at the Velkar homeworld on his screen, at the fires still burning on its surface. They had won the battle, but at such a terrible cost, and he knew that somewhere, Earth Command was receiving reports of what they had done. There would be consequences for acting without authorization. But as he watched Velkar ships begin rescue operations, pulling survivors from damaged vessels and evacuating wounded from the planet, Jake knew he would do it all again. The Defiant drifted in orbit above the Velkar homeworld, its hull scarred and blackened from battle. Emergency repair crews moved through damaged sections, sealing hull breaches and restoring critical systems. In the medical bay, doctors treated 19 injured crew members. 3 others had died in the fighting, their bodies now resting in the cargo bay until they could be given proper honors. Jake stood in the medical bay, watching as Dr. Kate Sullivan worked on a young engineer who had been caught in an explosion. The woman would live, but she would carry scars for the rest of her life. Jake felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Every injury, every death was his responsibility. Captain, you need to see this. Amy's voice came through his communication device. Jake made his way to the bridge, where Amy had set up a large display screen. On it played recordings from the Velkar planetary network, showing the Krath invasion from the beginning. The first images showed Krath warships arriving without warning. Then came the bombardment, massive weapons turning cities into craters. Jake watched as Velkar families ran through burning streets, as parents tried to shield their children from falling debris. He saw Krath soldiers rounding up civilians, forcing them onto transport ships bound for slave markets. One recording showed a Velkar school. The children had been in the middle of lessons when the attack came. Teachers tried to evacuate them, but a Krath strike hit the building. Jake turned away, unable to watch anymore. They sent these images to every major power in the galaxy, Amy said quietly, along with their distress calls. And everyone ignored them. Paul entered the bridge looking grim. Captain, message from Earth Command. It's Admiral Helen Grant. She wants to speak with you immediately. Jake had been expecting this. He straightened his uniform and nodded. Put her through. Admiral Grant appeared on the screen. She was a stern woman in her 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen countless battles. Right now, those eyes were filled with anger. Captain Morrison, what in the name of all that's holy did you think you were doing? She demanded. You engaged in military action without authorization. You violated the Treaty of Proxima, the Neutral Space Accord, and about 15 other agreements. You've potentially endangered Earth's entire diplomatic position in the galaxy. Yes, Admiral, Jake said simply. I know, you know. That's all you have to say? Grant's face was red. The Krath Empire has filed a formal complaint. They're demanding that we hand you over for trial under their justice system. Half the Galactic Council is calling humanity reckless warmongers. And the other half, Admiral? Jake asked quietly. What are they saying? Grant paused. For a moment, her anger seemed to waver. The other half is silent. Embarrassed probably because everyone knows they should have answered that distress call. Someone had to, Jake said. Admiral, I'll accept whatever punishment Earth Command sees fit. Court-martial, prison, discharge from service. But I won't apologize for saving lives. Grant stared at him through the screen for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily. Captain Morrison, you are hereby ordered to return to Earth immediately to face a military tribunal. The captains of the Vanguard, Sentinel, and Guardian are under the same orders. You'll be provided safe passage through neutral space. Understood, Admiral. Grant's expression softened slightly. Off the record, Captain? I'm proud of what you did, but officially, I can't say that. Grant out. The screen went dark. Paul looked at Jake with concern. A court-martial. That's serious, sir. I know, Jake said, but we knew the risks going in. A communication alert sounded. It was Admiral Trell, requesting permission to come aboard the Defiant. Jake agreed immediately, curious about what the Velkar commander wanted. An hour later, Trell materialized in the Defiant's transport bay. He was accompanied by 2 guards and carried a small container. Up close, Jake could see that the Velkar resembled Earth's reptiles, with scaled skin and shades of blue and green and large, intelligent eyes. Trell approached Jake and placed his hand over his heart in what seemed to be a gesture of respect. Captain Morrison, I came to thank you personally, and to give you this. He opened the container. Inside was a crystal that glowed with soft light, its surface covered in intricate patterns. This is a memory crystal, Trell explained. It contains the complete record of the invasion and your intervention. In Velkar culture, these crystals are priceless. They preserve our most important moments. I want you to take this so your people will know what you did here. Jake accepted the crystal carefully. Thank you, Admiral. But you should know I'm being called back to Earth to face punishment for what we did. Trell's eyes widened. Punishment? Your leaders would punish you for saving lives? It's complicated, Jake said. We broke a lot of rules. Then I will come to Earth and speak for you, Trell said firmly. The Velkar people will not allow your leaders to punish the beings who saved us from extinction. That's not necessary, Admiral. Perhaps not necessary, Trell said. But it is right. You taught us something important, Captain Morrison. You showed us that in this galaxy, there are still beings who value life over politics, who choose courage over comfort. If your leaders cannot see the value of that, then I will help them understand. In the following days, as the 4 human ships prepared for the long journey back to Earth, news of their actions spread across the galaxy. The response was divided. Some species praised humanity's courage. Others condemned them as dangerous idealists who had upset the delicate balance of galactic politics. The Krath Empire was the most vocal. They released statements calling humanity a rogue species that threatened the established order. They demanded sanctions, reparations, and the surrender of the 4 captains for trial. The major powers remained mostly silent, unwilling to support humanity but also unwilling to side openly with the Krath. On Earth, the news created a storm of controversy. Public opinion was split. Some saw Jake and the other captains as heroes who had upheld humanity's values. Others viewed them as reckless fools who had made a powerful enemy for no strategic gain. The debate filled every news channel and social media platform. As the Defiant began its journey home, Jake stood in the observation deck, looking back at the Velkar system. The planet was still damaged, still scarred by war, but it was alive. Cities that had been burning were being rebuilt. Ships that had been destroyed were being replaced. A species that had been hours from extinction would survive. Amy joined him at the window. "Do you think it was worth it, Captain? The court-martial, the political mess, all of it?" Jake thought about the Velkar children in that school. He thought about Admiral Trell's tears. He thought about the cheers that had echoed across the system when the Krath retreated. "Yes," he said simply. "It was worth it." Outside the window, stars shone in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Krath Empire was plotting revenge. Somewhere, the galactic powers were debating humanity's fate. But right now, in this moment, Jake Morrison had no regrets. They had answered the call when no one else would. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness of space as the 4 human ships approached. Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiant, feeling a mixture of emotions. This was home, but he was returning not as a hero but as someone facing a court-martial. Receiving docking instructions from Earth Command, Amy reported, "We're being directed to Luna Station." Luna Station orbited Earth's moon and served as headquarters for humanity's space fleet. It was where Jake had begun his career as a young officer, full of dreams about exploring the stars. Now he was returning under guard, his career possibly over. The 4 ships docked without incident. As Jake stepped off the Defiant, he was met by a security detail who escorted him to temporary quarters. He wasn't allowed to speak with his crew or the other captains. The isolation felt deliberate, as if Earth Command wanted to keep them separated. The trial began 3 days later, in a large chamber filled with military officers, government officials, and media representatives. The proceedings were broadcast live across Earth and transmitted to human colonies throughout the solar system. Jake sat at a table with a defense attorney, facing a panel of 5 judges. The prosecution laid out its case with cold efficiency. Jake and the other captains had violated the Treaty of Proxima by engaging in military action in neutral space without authorization. They had ignored direct orders by not waiting for instructions from Earth Command. They had endangered humanity's diplomatic standing and potentially started a war with the Krath Empire. These officers acted with complete disregard for proper authority, the prosecutor argued. They put their personal feelings above the safety and security of all humanity. Such behavior cannot be tolerated in a military organization. Jake listened without emotion. Everything they said was technically true. He had broken the rules, and rules existed for good reasons. But he also knew that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. When it was time for the defense, Paul Jensen took the stand. He had volunteered to speak on Jake's behalf, even though it might hurt his own career. "I was there when we received the Velkar distress signal," Paul said, his voice clear and strong. "I saw the data showing that every major power in the galaxy had ignored their call for help. I watched the recordings of children dying in the streets while their parents screamed for someone, anyone, to save them. And I watched Captain Morrison make a choice." Paul turned to look at Jake. He didn't make that choice lightly. He knew the consequences. He knew he might lose his career, his freedom, maybe even his life. But he also knew that if we didn't go, no one would. And I want to ask everyone in this room a simple question. If humanity won't help the helpless when we have the power to do so, then what do we stand for? The chamber erupted in argument. Some agreed loudly with Paul. Others shouted that discipline and order were more important than individual conscience. The judges called for silence, but the damage was done. Paul had turned the trial into a debate about humanity's values. Over the next week, more witnesses testified. Engineers described the desperate battle. Medical officers talked about treating the wounded. Amy played the recordings from the Velkar planet, forcing everyone to watch the horrors the Krath had inflicted. Some people in the chamber turned away. Others wept openly. Then came the surprise that changed everything. Admiral Trell arrived at Luna Station, traveling across hundreds of light years to speak at the trial. His appearance caused a sensation. It was the first time a Velkar had visited Earth. Trell stood before the judges, towering over the humans with his 7-foot height. When he spoke, his voice was translated by a computer, but the emotion needed no translation. "I am Admiral Trell of the Velkar Defense Fleet," he began. "I come before you to speak for Captain Morrison and his fellow officers. Your leaders claim these humans violated your laws. Perhaps they did, but they also saved my entire species from extinction." He activated a holographic display showing the Velkar homeworld before and after the human intervention. "This is what the Krath did to us in just 3 days. 30 million of my people died. Our cities burned. Our children were taken as slaves. We sent distress calls to every civilized species in the galaxy, and every single one turned away." Trell's voice grew stronger. "Every species except humanity. 4 ships, 4 captains who had never met us, who gained nothing by helping us, who risked everything to answer our call. They fought against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do." He turned to face the judges directly. "You call this a crime? I call it the highest form of courage. If you punish these officers, you tell the galaxy that humanity values rules more than lives. You tell the universe that when people cry for help, humans will check their regulations before acting." The chamber fell silent. Trell looked around at the assembled crowd, his alien features showing clear determination. "The Velkar people stand with Captain Morrison and his crew. If you punish them, you punish us. If you dishonor them, you dishonor us. And we will not accept that." After Trell's testimony, public opinion on Earth shifted dramatically. What had been a controversial incident became a source of pride. Protests erupted outside Luna Station, with thousands of people demanding the charges be dropped. Social media exploded with support for Jake and the other captains. Even some of the judges seemed moved by Trell's words. The verdict came after 2 more days of deliberation. The senior judge, Admiral Marcus Webb, read the decision. "This tribunal finds the defendants guilty of violating protocol and acting without proper authorization. However, we also recognize that the circumstances were extraordinary and that their actions, while unauthorized, were motivated by the highest moral principles." Jake felt his heart sink. Guilty. His career was over. But Admiral Webb wasn't finished. "Therefore, while we must uphold military discipline, we are suspending all sentences. The defendants are reinstated to their ranks with full honors. Furthermore, Captain Morrison and his fellow officers are hereby awarded the Solar Cross for exceptional courage in the face of overwhelming odds." The chamber erupted in cheers. Jake sat stunned, barely able to process what had happened. They were free. Not just free, but honored. Later, as Jake stood in his quarters looking at the medal they had given him, Amy burst through the door with a tablet. "Captain, you need to see this," she said urgently. "Intelligence just intercepted Krath communications. They're assembling a fleet, a massive fleet. Not to retake the Velkar system, but to attack Earth." Jake took the tablet and read the report. The Krath weren't just angry about their defeat. They saw humanity as a threat to their empire, an example that might inspire other species to resist. They planned to crush Earth before humanity could become stronger. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. "They're gathering ships from all over their empire." Jake looked out the window at Earth, so peaceful and beautiful. Soon it would be under attack, and it was his fault. He had known there might be consequences, but he hadn't imagined this. Then his communication device buzzed. It was Admiral Grant. "Captain Morrison, report to Conference Room 7 immediately. We have a situation." When Jake arrived at the conference room, he found Admiral Grant along with Nicole Hayes, Ryan Foster, and Chris Powell. On the screen were representatives from several alien species he didn't recognize. "Captain Morrison, meet our new allies," Admiral Grant said with a slight smile. After Trell's testimony went public, something unexpected happened. Other species started reaching out to us. Species who have also suffered under the Krath but were too afraid to resist. One of the aliens on the screen spoke. "I am Ambassador Kieran of the Threxian Republic. We watched what you did for the Velkar. We saw that someone finally had the courage to stand against the Krath, and we decided we will stand with you." Another alien nodded. The Pellin Union agrees. We are small, but we are many. Together we can face the Krath. Jake looked at the screen in amazement. Across the galaxy, smaller civilizations were choosing to unite because of what 4 human ships had done. What had started as a simple rescue mission was becoming something much larger. The Krath are coming, Admiral Grant said. But they're not just facing humanity anymore. They're facing a coalition. The Krath fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel near Neptune like a swarm of predatory insects. 200 warships, the largest military force ever assembled by the Krath Empire, spread across space in a formation designed to intimidate. At its center was the massive dreadnought Destroyer of Worlds, commanded by High Commander Vex himself. On the bridge of his flagship, Vex studied the displays showing human space. He felt contempt for these upstart creatures who dared to interfere with Krath expansion. They had destroyed his ships, humiliated his empire, and inspired resistance among species that should have remained properly terrified. That would end today. Open a channel to Earth, Vex commanded. His message was broadcast across all human frequencies, ensuring everyone would hear it. Humans, I am High Commander Vex of the Krath Empire. You have violated our sovereignty and interfered with our rightful conquest. Your actions demand punishment. Surrender the captains who attacked us and return the Velkar to our control. Do this and we will spare your worlds. Refuse and we will reduce Earth to ash. The response came quickly from Jake Morrison, now promoted to Commodore and given command of Earth's defense fleet. He stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned battleship Liberty, surrounded by human and allied vessels. High Commander Vex, this is Commodore Jake Morrison. I believe you're looking for me, but I'm afraid I can't agree to your terms. The answer is no. Vex's face twisted with rage. Then you have chosen death. All ships advance. Show these primitives what happens when they challenge the Krath. The massive fleet began moving toward Earth, but they weren't facing just humans anymore. The defense line near Neptune held 70 human ships, 30 Velkar vessels, and another 100 ships from the Threxian Republic, the Pellin Union, and the Sindari Collective. Species that had spent decades living in fear of the Krath had finally found the courage to fight back. All ships, this is Morrison. Jake broadcast to the Allied fleet. Today we face an enemy that believes might makes right. They think because they're strong they can take whatever they want. They think because they're many, we should be afraid. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what happens when people who have nothing left to lose decide to stand together. The first shots came from the Krath fleet. Massive energy beams designed to punch through shields and hull alike. The human ships scattered, using the same unpredictable tactics that had worked at the Velkar homeworld. They refused to form traditional battle lines, instead moving in small groups that struck and retreated. Linda Shaw commanded a squadron of human fighters, small craft that could slip between the larger vessels. She led her pilots through the Krath formation, targeting sensor arrays and communication relays. Shadow Squadron, break right. Hit those antenna clusters! The fighters dove and rolled, firing precisely aimed shots. One Krath cruiser lost all its sensors and drifted blind, unable to coordinate with its fleet. Another had its communications disabled and couldn't receive orders from the command ship. But the Krath had numbers on their side. For every ship the Allies disabled, 3 more pressed forward. The human battleship Courage took a direct hit and broke apart, its crew lost in an instant. 2 Threxian destroyers collided while trying to avoid Krath fire, destroying both. We're losing ground, reported the tactical officer on Jake's bridge. The Krath are pushing through our lines. At this rate, they'll reach Earth in 4 hours. Jake studied the battle display, looking for any advantage. The Krath fleet was powerful, but it was also rigid. They relied on overwhelming force and expected their enemies to break and run. They had never faced an enemy that adapted and improvised. All ships converge on coordinate 77 Alpha, Jake ordered. We're going to punch through their center. It was a desperate gambit. The strongest Krath ships were in the center of their formation, including the Destroyer of Worlds. But Jake had noticed something. The Krath positioned their most powerful ships where they could coordinate the entire fleet. If that coordination could be disrupted, the numerical advantage would matter less. Captain Steve Murphy commanded the human battleship Valiant. When he received Jake's orders, he understood immediately what was being asked. His ship was already damaged, its shields failing. But it still had engines, and it still had a crew willing to do whatever was necessary. "This is Murphy to all hands," he said calmly. "Abandon ship. Get to the escape pods. You have 2 minutes." His crew protested, but Murphy was firm. As the last escape pod launched, he sat alone on the bridge of the Valiant, his hands on the controls. The ship accelerated directly toward the destroyer of worlds, and there was nothing subtle about his intention. Vex saw the human ship coming and screamed orders to destroy it. Every weapon on the dreadnought fired, tearing chunks from the Valiant's hull. But Murphy had angled his shields to protect the engines and reactor. The dying ship kept coming, for humanity, Murphy whispered. Then the Valiant struck the destroyer of worlds at full speed. The explosion was visible from Earth. The massive dreadnought's shields failed under the impact, and the Valiant's reactor detonated, unleashing energy equivalent to a small star. The destroyer of worlds broke in half, its command center destroyed. High Commander Vex died without even realizing what had happened. The Krath fleet faltered. Without central coordination, ships began making individual decisions. Some continued to attack. Others tried to regroup. A few even attempted to retreat. The perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Jake seized the opportunity. "All ships concentrate fire on the Krath command cluster. Don't give them time to reorganize." The Allied fleet poured everything they had into the confused Krath ships. Nicole Hayes in the vanguard led a strike on a carrier, destroying it before it could launch its fighters. Ryan Foster used the Sentinel to shield damaged Allied vessels while they retreated for repairs. Velkar ships, fighting with renewed fury, targeted Krath weapons platforms. Linda's fighter squadron found an opening and dove straight through the Krath formation, destroying engines and life support systems on a dozen ships. "This is for the Valiant," she shouted as her weapons blazed. The battle raged for 6 more hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed, space filled with debris and the frozen bodies of the fallen. But slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The Krath had expected an easy victory. They had expected humanity to surrender or break. They hadn't expected this level of resistance, hadn't imagined that small species could fight with such determination. Then the moment that changed everything. A massive fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the battle. Jake's sensors identified them immediately. The Zinthari Confederation, the most powerful military force in the galaxy. A transmission came from the Zinthari flagship. "This is Fleet Commander Zara of the Zinthari Confederation. We have monitored this conflict with great interest. We watched humanity stand alone against overwhelming odds. We watched them save the Velkar when everyone else turned away. We watched them inspire others to resist oppression." Zara's voice grew stronger. "The Zinthari have claimed neutrality for too long. We have watched the Krath conquer and enslave while we did nothing, telling ourselves it was not our concern. But humanity has shown us that neutrality in the face of evil is itself evil. If humans with their limited power can stand for what is right, then we who have vast power can do no less. The Zinthari Confederation stands with the Allied forces. The Zinthari fleet joined the battle, and the Krath position became hopeless. Caught between the Allied forces and the most powerful military in the galaxy, the Krath fleet tried to retreat. But they were surrounded. The remaining Krath ships surrendered within the hour. The aftermath was overwhelming. Humanity and its allies had won, but the cost was terrible. 40 human ships had been destroyed. The Allied fleet had lost nearly half its vessels. Thousands had died, including Steve Murphy and the brave crew members who had fought alongside him. But they had also accomplished something unprecedented. The Krath Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for generations, was forced to sign a peace treaty. They agreed to cease all military expansion, release all slave populations, and pay reparations to the species they had conquered. 3 months after the battle, Jake stood on a new space station built jointly by humans, Velkar, and other allied species. It orbited neutral space and served as headquarters for what was being called the Freedom Coalition. Admiral Trell stood beside him, looking at the construction of new ships in the distance. These weren't just human or Velkar vessels, but combined designs incorporating the best technology from multiple species. "You changed everything, Commodore Morrison," Trell said quietly. "The entire balance of power in the galaxy has shifted because of what you did." Jake shook his head. "We just did what anyone should have done. We answered the call. But no one else did," Trell reminded him. "For generations, the galaxy operated on fear and self-interest. Species looked the other way when others suffered, telling themselves it was not their problem. You showed us a different way. You proved that courage is contagious, that standing up to evil inspires others to do the same. Jake looked at the ships being built, at the crews from different worlds working together. Humanity was no longer a minor species ignored by the